Your old or broken phone can let you down, but at Verizon, trade in any old phone from our top brands and get iPhone 16 Pro with Apple Intelligence with a new line on My Plan and iPad and Apple Watch Series 10. After all, you don't want your old phone to die on you when you're lost.
Perfect.
Or for your broken phone to glitch at the worst possible time.
Hey, can I get your number? Oh.
Trade in your old phone for a brand new iPhone 16 Pro, iPad, and Apple Watch. Visit Verizon.com today. Additional terms apply. Service plan required for Apple Watch and iPad.
That movie everyone's raving about, we have thoughts. That chart-topping hit, we have thoughts. That viral trend you can't escape, oh, we definitely have thoughts. At Slate, we don't just consume culture. We think about it, interrogate it, debate it, and when necessary, roast it. On Culture Gabfest, we break down what media is worth your time and what isn't. On Hit Parade, we think about why pop's biggest hits take off and what keeps them stuck in our head. And on my show, Decoder Ring, we unravel the cultural mysteries you didn't even know you cared about. With Slate Plus, you get even more. Ad-free listening, bonus episodes, and more exclusive content from your favorite shows. And yes, they also will contain lots of thoughts. You can join Slate Plus directly within Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Or visit slate.com/cultureplus to get access wherever you listen.
It is Monday, February 24th, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast here at Slate. Back with you again this week. I am Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I also co-host the national college football podcast Split Zone Duo. We've got a busy show for you this week. Along with an excellent guest, Dermot Corrigan of The Athletic, we will discuss a guilty verdict in the sexual assault trial of Luis Rubiales, the former head of the Spanish Soccer Federation. We will do a post-mortem on the Four Nations face-off and its associated geopolitics in hockey. And we will take stock of the ending of a major sports television relationship, the one between Major League Baseball and ESPN. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the day in women's sports. Lindsay, I'm told that we had an issue with a podcast cord, so I think I'm going to hear your voice when you talk. You're with us.
Can you hear me now?
This sounds like evidence that you found the cord.
We found the cord. I'm in Miami. Was at South Beach a little bit yesterday. No worse for the wear, but here for Unrivaled. So it was phenomenal to get to watch that 3x3 tournament in place and see Natasha Cloud hit a game winner on her birthday. And I remembered my microphone. I forgot my cord, but a little adventure walking across a highway in Miami and down a back alley with some chickens. And here we are.
We're not cord cutters here at Hang Up and Listen.
Yeah. Apparently they're important and also a little bit harder to find than you might think.
And of course, speaking of podcast tech and the things you need, we've got Ben Lindbergh with us. Ben is coming to us from his newly reinforced soundproof studio in Manhattan. And so far I'm hearing nothing, Ben, but your voice just there. Seems like the sound situation has been vastly improved for our Hang Up and Listen audience.
Yeah, take that, city sirens. Can't hear you anymore. But yes, in honor of the Yankees allowing well-groomed beards, by the way, I went without shaving this weekend, as you all can tell, though our listeners can't. So thanks to Devin Williams and Hal Steinbrenner for the inspiration.
Podcasting, as I like to say, is a visual medium. Before we get into our business, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. Subscribing helps us make the show, of course. It allows you to get the show ad-free, which is a tremendous perk. And you also get bonus segments. And indeed, we've got one of those live for Slate Plus members at this very moment. It is about the looming specter of a Stephen A. Smith presidential campaign. That's right. It's time to talk about it. You can hear that episode right now, as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. In August of 2023, Spain won the Women's World Cup in Australia. And in the immediate aftermath of that victory, Luis Rubiales pulled in Spanish player Jenni Hermoso and kissed her on the lips. Rubiales was then the head of the Spanish Soccer Federation, the top person in the national governing body for the sport, and cameras caught it all. Hermoso looked quite uncomfortable right away. Afterwards, she was clear that she had not given her consent for the kiss. Rubiales claimed that she had. Rubiales resigned from his post within a few months of that moment, and a legal case against him in Spain gathered some steam. Last week, a court there found him guilty of sexual assault and fined him 10,000 euros while sparing him any prison time. The prosecution had asked for 1 year in the event of a sexual assault conviction. Prosecutors also charged him and 3 others with coercion. A judge found them not guilty on that charge, but, quote, attributed full credibility to Hermoso's accounting of events. Joining us to cap this story is Dermot Corrigan of The Athletic. He is based in Madrid, and he has a long history covering Spanish soccer, including covering this trial firsthand. Dermot, thank you for being here.
Yeah, cheers.
On the surface, this was such a simple case involving an act the whole world saw on television, and for which the victim was immediately clear she had not consented. Was the outcome as cut and dried as it appeared from afar, or was there more to this case that created some sort of drama as it wound towards a verdict?
The drama was created, I guess, because Rubiales and his co-defendants as well argued in court that they had done nothing wrong. Rubiales claimed, as he said there, that he had asked for consent. Hermoso said that didn't happen. Rubiales also he gave different arguments about how he'd been carried away with the emotion of the event. He also talked about how it wasn't such a strange thing to kiss somebody. He said in court that he had kissed male teammates back when he was a player, that in moments of celebration, these things happened. He accepted that that his actions were unpresidential, that he got carried away, but he denied that he had committed a crime. And in the Spanish court system, there have been some high-profile cases, sexual assault cases before, in which the court system has not accepted the evidence of the victim, in which some cases have been criticized by lots of outside observers for not being strong enough when it comes to coming down on sexual assault. So there was quite a bit of doubt right up until the verdict was announced here in Spain, speaking with other legal experts as well about how the judge was going to go. In the end, he did find Rubiales guilty of sexual assault, and he found all the defendants not guilty of the coercion part as well, which, Hermoso and people around her were not so happy with.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about the cultural ramifications of this case, the way it was covered, the way it had an impact outside soccer, the larger cultural reckoning that is going on in Spain?
As soon as the case happened, people watching on TV, especially some Spanish politicians who were watching on TV, were quickly onto social media to call it out and say, like, this is not on, this is sexual assault, something has to be done here. Not everybody within Spain saw it that way. Rubiales had people who supported him. He was already a divisive character within Spanish football, within Spanish society. So it kind of entered into a culture war type of a situation maybe. Once the images went around the world, maybe the global reaction to what had happened that shaped a lot of the reaction in Spain, I would say. The government came out, the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, came out to say that Rubiales should go. Rubiales and the Spanish Prime Minister had a close relationship before that had been involved in Spain being awarded the Men's World Cup in 2030. Some people in Spain were worried that it was a bad look for the country, that if they didn't do something about Rubiales, that they might lose that Men's World Cup. Along the way, sometimes what happened to Hermoso got a little bit lost amongst different people having their different interests and the different political angles that came involved in it. But she was very clear from the start that it wasn't right, that she was going to do something about it, to get justice in court, and she did.
One of the most striking things from reading the coverage of the trial was about the first day when Hermoso took the stand and talked about the impact that this has had on her life and the days surrounding it. What did we learn from her testimony in this trial?
Just how alone that she felt, that once the kiss had happened, it happened in such a moment of elation for everybody else. Everybody was celebrating. Spain had won the World Cup, and should be pointed out that Spain winning that World Cup was a tremendous achievement, because there have been deep structural, sexism issues within Spanish football, especially at the Spanish Federation. Some of the players had stopped representing the team because of problems they had with the coach, with Rubiales, with the setup at the federation. So the women's team were always fighting against huge challenges. They didn't have the support, the backup that teams from the US or the UK or different European countries would have had. So to have won the tournament was a tremendous achievement. Once the kiss happened and Hermoso was dealing with it, internally first and then with her closest circle, she was quickly aware of how Rubiales was mobilizing a lot of people at the federation, most of the federation staff, in order to protect him. So instead of the federation, people who she trusted, her coach, assistant coach, other people who had a duty of care towards Hermoso, they were instead scrambling to try and protect Rubiales because they were afraid that he would lose his job. Maybe then they would lose their jobs. So she felt completely alone. And yeah, when she came back to Spain, she was being pressured to come out in public to back up Rubiales' side of events again, so that he could avoid any punishment for what had happened. People from the federation were calling her, were putting pressure on her in order to back that up. She was even saying how, when she was at home in her house in Madrid, she would look out the window. There were strange cars outside. She wasn't sure if there were people were following her. It was just a tremendously stressful and just awful situation that she found herself in. And again, just being alone, that the people who, should have been there for her in one of the most, difficult moments of her life just weren't there to protect her at all.
Dermot, my understanding is that the Royal Spanish Football Federation is a major national institution in Spain. It's venerated, it seems, in a way that the American soccer governing body isn't, and that I'm just not really familiar with. Is that right? And to what extent did Rubiales seek to draw power from that? How big a figure has he been in Spain? And to what extent did he try to marshal that to win this case?
Yeah, it's a super interesting one because soccer, football is huge in Spain. It's a huge part of the culture. Lots of people are soccer fans. A lot of people are fans of the men's game, Real Madrid, Barcelona. Also people who are fans of the women's game. And the men's team had a tremendously successful period back, won the European Championship in 2008, the World Cup in 2010, the Euros in 2012 as well. And football is just huge here. The federation, whether the Royal Spanish Football Federation deserve all the credit for that is a big issue. There's long been problems of corruption at the federation. Different presidents have had to resign in the past. There's been different allegations against people in the past. And Rubiales fit into that kind of murky world of football administration. As I said before, he was a polarizing figure. One of the first things that he did on taking over as the head of the federation was to fire the men's coach just before the 2018 World Cup, which caused a huge outcry. Again, he rode that out. He said at the World Cup, or he said when he came back from the World Cup, that he'd been speaking to Obama at that World Cup, and Obama had said that, sometimes you have to take these decisions, that he had backed him up. Whether that conversation actually took place or not, I couldn't really say. But he was just this kind of larger than life, bombastic character who ruled at the federation. He was in charge there on what he said goes. I remember speaking to people at the time who were working there, and there was a culture of fear really at the federation, that he was the guy who had a lot of power. He centralized a lot of power amongst him and his inner circle. The players on the men's team, just kind of got on with playing for the team, didn't worry about it too much, but they had all the resources that they needed. They had they had good coaches, they had all the backup they needed. The women's team just didn't receive the basic structures and backup that you would need. Just things like training kits, footballs, having the right staff around, the medical staff, fitness staff, dietitians, the type of things that other federations and other teams would just take for granted weren't there for women in Spain. And Rubiales, had no problem with that. He was in charge of that, and it didn't seem to be an issue for him.
Rubiales and others clearly pressured Hermoso in the aftermath of this incident to record a video, essentially absolving Rubiales of blame. Why do you think the coercion charge didn't stick?
That in order for a charge of coercion to stick, there needs to be intimidation or violence. The prosecution case was that there was definitely intimidation, and maybe if it wasn't physical violence, that violence doesn't have to be physical. It can be mental violence, psychological violence. That Jenni Hermoso was pushed into such a situation that, on the way back on the plane from the World Cup, she was crying. As I said before, she was, worried to leave her house when she was back in Madrid. But the judge felt that to fit with what Spanish law says about coercion, that the prosecution hadn't made a strong enough case. And especially that the people involved, the co-accused of Rubiales, who included the former marketing director at the federation, the former women's coach, and a former sporting director of the men's team, the prosecution didn't succeed in showing the judge enough that they had actually put enough pressure onto her for it to be coercion. I'm not a legal expert. People were surprised, and some people weren't surprised. Some people were surprised. Hermoso and the people around her, some of the other members of the Spain team who were playing at the weekend here in Valencia, so they were surprised and a bit disappointed at that verdict. And there will be an appeal, so it will go on to the next stage, and maybe that will be overturned, but we don't know yet.
I've got a couple of things. First of all, one of the most shocking parts to me, and not much surprises me about how women's soccer players are mistreated, but there's this nugget about the psychologist. I think FIFA requires every team to have a psychologist, and even the psychologist never came to Hermoso to ask how she was doing. And in fact, didn't, seem to care at all about her well-being as a player in this moment, when in theory, that's the whole point of having someone with mental health expertise. And it came out in this trial that this psychologist kind of wasn't even really qualified to be doing this job at all. Can you expand upon what we learned about this aspect of things and kind of what the FIFA requirements are and how these national teams are maybe not following the spirit of the law there?
Yeah, FIFA, it's called safeguarding for FIFA, that each team has to have a safeguarder who is somebody. FIFA have their own safeguarding courses, which, the idea is that federations send some of their staff on these courses so that they know to look for warning signs, maybe that some abuse has happened or something that has gone on that shouldn't happen, and to be able to step in and support the person and then be involved in if there are disciplinary proceedings afterwards. But the main idea is that people aren't left alone. If there is an incident happens or an incident of abuse takes place, that the victim of the abuse is quickly supported and gets everything that they need. The guy who was appointed to that role by the Spanish Federation admitted in court that he had no training at all. He was a Federation employee who happened to be available, I guess. A lot of speaking to different people within women's football in Spain, both before and after the trial, it's part of what I was saying before about the structural sexism that was there at the Federation, that the right people weren't in the right jobs. It was a case that there was a position available. It was a chance for somebody to go to Australia, to go to the World Cup. They didn't look to find a really well-qualified person who could do it. They gave it to somebody who was already involved, part of the system, who was connected to somebody else at the Federation. So the idea was to reward people who were within the inner circle of the Federation, or to find jobs for the people who they want to have a job for, rather than to have the best people in the best positions to support the women. And that will be similar. Like Jorge Vilda, who was the women's coach at the World Cup, they did win the World Cup, but he's been involved with the Federation for years. His dad was previously involved at the Federation. He's not a guy who had a proven track record, a CV of success with a club team or with another team that you would say, okay, he's the best possible candidate for this job. And the same at lots of other positions within the support structure around the players.
Dermot, you mentioned that this has become a culture war in Spain, and sports organizations sometimes mirror society. And I wonder if Luis Rubiales still has shooters, so to speak, within the Federation. Is there still a Rubiales camp that continues to reign or to exist somewhere on the fringes of the governing body of football in Spain?
If you speak to any of the people who are left at the Federation, everybody says no, that Luis Rubiales was a bad guy. He came in, it's kind of like he was a rotten apple. He happened to be at the top of the Federation, but he was a rotten apple who brought some of his own people into the Federation, including some of the people who were accused in the trial. But now they're gone, and now it's okay. It's not that simple at all. The way the Federation works is that the regional barons in Spain, so the head of the Madrid Federation, the Andalusian Federation, the Catalan Federation, they have huge power, and they're able to elect one of their own to be the president of the organization. It's kind of a medieval, feudal type of system. They're called the barons here in Spain, they're referred to. And the idea after the World Cup, when the attention of the world was on Spain, the Spanish government knew, this wasn't a good look for the country. They said, look, we're going to go in and we're going to reform this system. We're going to change it all around and we're going to clean up Spanish football. But they just were unable to do so. The way that the Federation is set up, a lot of these guys are really well connected within politics, within society as well. and they basically were able to fend off the pressure from the federation, elect one of their own to be the new president, Rafael Luzin. He comes from the Galician Federation. He had a conviction on his CV for a misuse of funds for a previous job when he was running a city in Galicia. That in theory was going to rule him out of being able to take over the federation, but he went to court and managed to get around that. He is talking a lot about being part of a new era at the federation of openness and exclusivity, but he's also one of the old guard who were there with Rubiales when he was there. He wasn't putting up his hand, wasn't shouting for Rubiales to go. Even at the time after the kiss, in the week after the kiss, it was FIFA who first suspended Rubiales and forced him to resign. It wasn't the federation themselves, rising up from inside. People say that's because of the culture of fear that Rubiales imposed on top of everybody. But there's also a lot of people, a lot of different power centers, people who want to protect the power and the influence, the resources that they have. And that kind of medieval structural baronial system has not been changed at all.
One thing I will never, ever forget about this whole case and saga over the last 18, 20 months is that meeting a few weeks afterwards with the Spanish Federation when Rubiales up there defiantly repeating over and over again that he would not resign and getting a standing ovation from everyone. And, thinking about that in contrast to what Hermoso was going through in the time, it's just, I don't know, the symbolism of that, of the women having achieved so much, winning the World Cup despite the lack of support that they have received, despite everything the Federation did, and the Federation still defiantly applauding its abuser and taking credit for the victory. It's startling. It seemed like a lot of the Spanish Federation was still supporting Rubiales at the trial, that he still had a lot of support. Where is the Federation now, and what is their relationship with the women's team, who is, of course, persisting? They're at UEFA qualifiers this week. They play this week England in a huge game and are trying to kind of get on with their careers, but are still working for the same federation. And also, do you feel like we're going to see Hermoso back on the team? Is that still a possibility?
I remember that day, that assembly was just amazing when Rubiales shouted from the podium. He was talking about false feminists as well, who were the people who were out to get him, about a conspiracy to take him down, but he wasn't going to give in to it. And one of the people who stood to applause was Luis de la Fuente, who's the men's coach. De la Fuente quickly, once Rubiales was suspended by FIFA, De la Fuente quickly brought out a statement saying, he'd been carried away in the moment as well. This was his boss. He was wrong. He apologized. But I never got the suspicion from De La Fuente afterwards that he really understood what he had done wrong. I asked him at a press conference a couple of weeks afterwards. This was when 81 of the women's players had refused to play for the federation until there were some reforms, until some of the people around Rubiales were taken out. The men's team at this stage were preparing to play a qualifier themselves. And I asked De La Fuente, did he not see any kind of contradiction that while their peers were on strike and couldn't represent the federation, that the men's team were just getting on with things as usual? He didn't really understand the question when I asked him, partly maybe because I had phrased it strangely in Spanish, but the press officer kind of explained to him what I was asking, and he was like, oh no, we support them completely, but they did nothing really to help their peers. And De La Fuente showed up at the trial last week or a couple of weeks ago here in Madrid as well. And again, he wanted to say the right thing, but he was also more worried about not being brought into it himself. That he happened to be at the Federation headquarters at the day that a meeting was held, which was a big part of the prosecution case for coercion, that Rubiales was circling the people around him to try to head off the suspension that was coming from FIFA. De La Fuente just said he was there. He was in the office at the time, but he didn't really notice what was going on. He had a good chance to come out and just support Jennifer Hermoso to go against Rubiales, but he just kept trying to avoid questions, just made a bad look. And that's how a lot of the men's game in Spain has viewed the whole thing. It's kind of like something else that is happening. It's maybe like a different sport or a different world, or just they think it's awful and Rubiales is a bad guy, and they wish the best for Jennifer Hermoso, but it's got nothing to do with them. And that idea or that kind of attitude persists at the federation, I would argue. Like, Luzan has just taken over in December. He has made a couple of appointments of more women to senior positions at the federation. So maybe there is a plan for a new era, but there's very little evidence of it so far. The coach is still, Montse Tomé is a coach who hasn't picked Jennifer Hermoso very often for the team. She was the assistant coach to Vilda. She was there through all of the problems that the team had before, and didn't stand up against Rubiales until he was gone as well. So as long as maybe she remains in charge, it's hard to talk about having like a clean break from the past and to say that the team is moving on to a new era. Hermoso is 34. She's playing in Mexico now. She is coming towards the end of her career. She's still a super talented player, Spain's record all-time goal scorer. It's kind of strange to see the team playing and her not there. But as to whether she will be playing maybe at the Euros this summer or not, it's hard to say, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen, especially if Tomé is still as the coach.
Well, lastly, speaking of not moving on, Dermot, you mentioned the potential for an appeal, and both parties actually said that they plan to appeal Rubiales on the conviction for sexual assault and Hermoso presumably for the acquittal on coercion, or perhaps the sentence as well. Where will this case go next, and how long will it continue to be litigated?
The case was held at the Audiencia Nacional in Spain, which is a special court used for unusual crimes. There's been, at the same time as the Rubiales trial was going on, there was a drug trafficking trial going on in a different part of the court. There's also been terrorism charges. It's a kind of high-level court which is used for strange cases. In this case, it was used because it happened outside the event happened, or the World Cup final was on in Sydney. It was outside Spanish jurisdiction. So in order to have a trial at all, they held it up at the Audiencia Nacional. But that means that an appeal is going to take a good while. It is likely to drag on. Spanish judicial system does not move very quickly. I think it was the fact that this was such a high-profile case is why it came to trial within 18 months. There was a move by the Spanish legal establishment to try to be seen to be doing something, I would argue. But the appeal could take, I don't know, it could take a year. Again, I don't follow the court system that closely, but it could take a year. I do know that Rubiales is also under investigation for a couple of different allegations as well. There's a corruption investigation which is ongoing, even while one trial was going on in one part of Madrid. A different judge in a different part of Madrid was taking depositions for potential corruption charges to be brought against Rubiales. So that's still going to go on as well. These cases tend to take a long time. It's a pity. Justice delayed is justice denied is a phrase that comes up. But I would say that the fact that this judge did find Rubiales guilty and did, as he said before, he just took Hermoso aside. He said she was a very believable witness, that he took her side of the story. He didn't believe Rubiales' side of the story. That's quite a big step forward for the Spanish justice system. Maybe it shouldn't be, or it should have been better before, but people within Spain have seen that the fact that a powerful guy in such a job who denied having done anything wrong, that he was found guilty of crime of sexual assault, is a step forward. So even if the coercion allegations don't stick in the end, Hermoso can be disappointed with that, and I would understand that. But the fact that somebody like Rubiales has been found guilty is a really important, significant step, and Hermoso did a really important and significant job in making sure that happened.
It sounds like we'll have a lot of time to continue to process this story in the future. Dermot Corrigan, thank you so much. Really appreciate you for coming on the program.
Cheers, guys.
We'll be back after this. As we progress through the season, every fan knows that big wins are hard to come by and tough losses are even harder to accept. But do you know what isn't hard to accept? Discover. Believe it or not, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard that right. 99%. So make a good call for your wallet and get Discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard.
What is... Dax, are you?
Tracking all our cars on Carvana Value Tracker on all our devices? Yes, Kristen, yes I am.
Well, I've been looking for my phone for...
In Dax's domain, we see all. So we always know what our cars are worth.
All of them?
All of them. Value surge, trucks up 3.9%.
That's a great offer.
I know. Sell?
Sell.
Track your car's value with Carvana Value Tracker today.
Back with you on Hang Up and Listen. I'm Alex Kirshner with Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs. We talked about the Four Nations face-off last week, and the action only got better after we did. Thursday night's championship game in the best-on-best international hockey tournament was a firecracker, a 3-2 overtime win for Canada against the United States in Boston. More than 9 million people watched that on ESPN, making it the fourth most watched NHL-sanctioned game ever. The league ran the tournament, so this counts as sort of an NHL game. Connor McDavid, the best player in the world, got the overtime winner for Canada. It was a serious capital M moment for hockey. And it was also a fraught, kind of toxic moment in geopolitics. This game happened against the backdrop of tariff and annexation threats flowing from Washington to Ottawa. The U.S. team basically made Donald Trump its mascot, having him phone into the locker room the morning of the title game and explicitly calling out for his attendance, which he did not deliver on. There were MAGA hats all over the building, many of them captured by ESPN's cameras. Just the morning of the game, the White House press secretary reported that Canada was going to be our soon-to-be 51st state, repeating a line that has come out of the White House often of late. And afterward, Justin Trudeau said, quote, "You can't take our country and you can't take our game." This was fun. This was also weird, not really healthy. Lindsay, your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember last week when I was just giddy over, the 3 fights in 2 minutes or whatever it was, and the on-ice skirmishes and drama. That was enjoyable. The whole ha-ha, you're a state MAGA washing of our hockey team and America is just not as fun, and it's really hard to separate. I was rooting for the U.S., but it was more difficult, right? When you saw the MAGA hats all throughout the stadium, when you had Trump's call being treated as this huge bastion of goodwill and just being, lauded with praise from the players and the coaches and everyone. And I don't like where we are as a country right now. And I don't like the way it is bleeding into sports. And I guess it was Pollyannish not to really have grappled with how this would impact sports. Of course, I do not believe that sports are apolitical. I do not really watch sports for an escape, but there is an ugliness here that seems more about tearing down others than it does about uplifting. And this whole great event this all left a sour taste in my mouth.
Yeah, we talked last week about how the political climate was affecting this game and the response to the game, and how Trump had turned us into heels with all of the belligerence toward Canada and the booing of the national anthems. But it all felt one step removed last time we talked about this. And subsequently, the subtext became text, because it wasn't just sports as theater, using sports as a proxy for these larger geopolitical issues, which has always happened, Exhibit A being the Miracle on Ice. But after we spoke, it really became front and center, in part because the USA team put it there. Bill Guerin, the GM of the team, former player, welcomed Trump to the game, invited him to the game, said how great it would be if he could attend. And of course, there was the call, and the players, seemingly almost to a man, were pretty psyched about hearing from the president. I didn't hear a whole lot of dissenting word from that locker room. And maybe there were people who were just quietly not wanting to create a distraction in that moment. But there once was a time when an athlete could express nonpartisan excitement about getting a call from a president without that being seen as an endorsement or even a political statement, particularly. And that time is long gone. So when the team was so vocal in inviting Trump's support and saying how happy they were to have heard from him, that does become a political statement to some extent. So it then became very difficult, given all of that pregame rhetoric, given Justin Trudeau's statement after the game. It was very hard to ignore that dimension of things. And that did sort of detract from the innocence of it, just the spectacle of, oh, look at this high-level competition. This is so much fun. And yes, there are fisticuffs, but it's ultimately not super serious. It kind of became quite serious in the end. Yes, it's still a hockey game, but there really was sort of an identification, I think, with what is going on between these two countries on the part of these two teams.
Indeed. I think it is worth noting here as well that the association between USA Hockey, the national governing body, and Trump is not new. In the 2020 campaign, the Miracle on Ice team was celebrating its 40th anniversary right around this same time of the year. And a huge chunk of the team, nearly half the roster, many of the remaining living players from the team, showed up on stage at a Trump rally, as did the daughter of the late head coach Herb Brooks, and talked about how her father, were he around, she believes would have been a Trump fan. The Trump campaign at the time tried to draw very closely from this association. The campaign said in a statement back then that, and I'll paraphrase, that just as the 1980 team reminded us of a time when we came together as a country against communism, it's a shame that today liberals are so intolerant that they'd be mad that we would have this appearance of kind of this national treasure hockey team with the politician. This has been in the offing for a few years. Hockey is what you think it is in terms of the overarching political viewpoint of the sport. This is not a particularly progressive sports space. Not that there are that many that are. And I think more than that, because that's not news, right? I don't think any of us expected that this is like the Oberlin College Book Club in the NHL, but the explicit embrace of Donald Trump by the National Hockey Program is, it's heavy-handed. There's a ton of this, and it does not seem like anyone, Ben, really does have any reservations about it.
Yeah, and even on the other side, Wayne Gretzky, who is the honorary captain of the Canadian team, he got some blowback for being as buddy-buddy with Trump as he is. So it was really kind of coming from both sides. And I do wonder whether this is a preview of things to come. When we talked about the incoming Trump administration and how it would affect sports, I think one thing we pointed out is that Trump is a very sports-forward president, for better or worse. He pays attention to sports. He injects himself into sports. He's obviously been involved with sports as an owner and other capacities. And so he is just much more present than, say, Joe Biden was. And we've already seen that. He was at the Super Bowl. He was at the Daytona 500. He considered attending this game. So, yes, he's always going to seize the spotlight. And the spotlight is bright on these major sporting events. But he's also going to inject the political conversation and all of those valences into these events. And I wonder whether this is a preview of how sports will respond to Trump during this administration, because, of course, the first time around, there were instances where teams didn't show up or players didn't show up at the White House for the customary post-championship celebration and meet and greet, and we saw some players making pointed stances. Will we see that this time around? I'm sure we will to some extent, but of course the mood in the country has shifted. The approval ratings have shifted to some extent. And so players who perhaps might have felt pressured not to go along with such statements or to not show up at the White House, maybe they won't feel that anymore. Maybe they will feel like they can just let their true feelings out. So we will be confronted with this many times, I'm sure, over the next almost 4 years.
Yeah, and I think, everyone is like, it's a lot of the players are trying to be like, look, if it was any president, we'd be excited. Like, it's, it's just, trying to be like, this is just like, we're proud to be with our country and this is the president of this country. But the thing with Trump that makes things different, among many things, is just the way that he so forcefully inserts his political agenda into the sports conversation, whereas a lot of presidents in the past, it's kind of been this soft power type thing, a way of using sports just to kind of appeal to the masses. Trump is very clearly using this as a way to push the agenda of getting Canada as the 51st state and pushing the agenda of tariffs and calling Justin Trudeau a loser in these statements about this game, right? There's nothing that is detached from his agenda, right? There's no separation here of the figurehead job and the political agenda and it's just very clear. So it's really hard to stomach any sort of attempt from these fans and athletes to separate this. And it's hard to stomach when he is enacting an agenda that is so discriminatory, that is so hurtful to so many people that I care about, that a lot of listeners to this show care about. It's hard to stomach that union, and it's depressing. I mean, we have a World Cup coming up. We have an Olympics coming up in the United States, and there's just going to be no escaping the Trumpiness of it all. And God, I hate that.
Yes, he is going to wrap himself in the American flag around these sporting events, no question. And that's going to be a feature of these events. I think it's a good point, and I think it's inevitable. On the actual hockey of it all, the long night continues for USA Hockey. Another near miss against Canada. It's been since 1996 that the United States has actually won a best-on-best international tournament. This kind of mirrored, Ben, the 2010 Olympics, where the United States got a win against Canada in the pool rounds of the tournament and then loses in overtime in the championship game. And the mirrors were kind of incredible. In 2010, it was Sidney Crosby, the best player in the game at the time, taking a pass from the left corner and firing it into the net. And in 2025, it was Connor McDavid, the best player in the world, taking a pass from the left corner and firing into the net in overtime. Canada does poetry in hockey better than we do. And it is kind of incredible that these two players would have these two goals in overtime against the Americans.
Yeah, it was really a treat to see McDavid and Crosby playing alongside each other and having this kind of ending. And Crosby's international accomplishments at this point are just absolutely legendary. Team Canada 48-6 with Sidney Crosby in uniform in international competition. He's been winning international championships for 2 decades at this point, going back to juniors. World Championship, World Cup, 4 Nations, Olympic gold twice, World Juniors. It's a shame that there haven't been even more best-on-best competitions during his tenure, but he's assembled just an absolutely unbelievable resume here. And the games were great. And yes, Canada won and gets to retain the title as the best in the world, but clearly parity has been achieved here, more or less. Obviously, who scores that golden goal in overtime is what matters, but this was an incredibly hard-fought game and hard-fought tournament, and there's just not a lot of daylight between these two programs. It used to be not even close, and now USA is pushing Canada to overtime, and everyone is acknowledging that this is an incredibly well-pitched battle and well-matched rosters, and the Kachucks, I think, probably created a lot of fans for themselves in this tournament, and there was just a ton of skill on display there as well. So yes, it would be sort of a shame if all of the Trumpy overtones overshadowed how excellent this tournament was, what a success it was for the NHL, and how well it reflected on both of these hockey programs. So I'm glad it didn't completely overshadow that aspect of things in this segment as well.
As we move, spring training is underway, and so is the last season, maybe ever, at least for a while, of Major League Baseball games airing on ESPN. We will discuss the end of an era and what could be next.
That movie everyone's raving about, we have thoughts. That chart-topping hit, we have thoughts. That viral trend you can't escape, oh, we definitely have thoughts. At Slate, we don't just consume culture. We think about it, interrogate it, debate it, and when necessary, roast it. On Culture Gabfest, we break down what media is worth your time and what isn't. On Hit Parade, we think about why pop's biggest hits take off and what keeps them stuck in our head. And on my show, Decoder Ring, we unravel the cultural mysteries you didn't even know you cared about. With Slate Plus, you get even more. Ad-free listening, bonus episodes, and more exclusive content from your favorite shows. And yes, they also will contain lots of thoughts. You can join Slate Plus directly within Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Or visit slate.com/culture plus to get access wherever you listen.
If you are a baseball fan of a certain age in this country, you probably grew up watching Sunday Night Baseball in the summers. You probably tuned in regularly to watch Baseball Tonight. You probably have taken in the reporting of Peter Gammons and Tim Kirkjian and Buster Olney and so many more. And if you have, you've watched all of that on ESPN, a pivotal Major League Baseball broadcasting partner since 1990. But the partnership between the league and the network will end after this year, after the two parties, but it does seem primarily like ESPN as the initiator walked away from the final 3 years of their contract following an opt-out. ESPN would have owed the league approximately $550 million per year, and it seems like the money just didn't work out for Disney to keep this going. A Sportico analysis found that ESPN was only getting back something like 1/10 of its rights fees to Major League Baseball in advertising revenue, and it's not clear at this point that a whole lot of cable subscribers are hanging on to ESPN just for a handful of national baseball games every month, because as we've talked about, the baseball teams all have their own regional sports offerings. Ben, does it seem right that Major League Baseball will miss this partnership more than Mickey Mouse will?
I think it's fair to say that MLB would not have unilaterally torn up this contract and walked away from this agreement if ESPN had not sought to renegotiate and lower its fees. So yes, I think ESPN was the primary instigator here. That said, I don't know that Rob Manfred's bloviating after this was announced is purely spin, because he made it clear that the league is not thrilled with how ESPN has handled baseball. And this has been a common complaint among baseball fans going back years. Baseball Tonight was canceled after 2016. Sunday Night Baseball, the format has changed to the point where the baseball itself, the game, feels almost secondary. It's just constant interviews and a stream of distractions from the actual action that's going on here. So it's true that you just don't see baseball mentioned on ESPN's other programs. Now, something like SportsCenter is not as central to the sporting universe as it used to be. We all have phones. We can all look up highlights ourselves, but baseball just didn't have a big presence when it came to ESPN's debate and talk shows either. We're going to talk about Stephen A. Smith in our bonus segment. He doesn't talk about baseball much, except when it's to question whether Shohei Ohtani could be the face of baseball because of the language barrier. So that's just a reflection of the sport and how it's consumed and how it's discussed, more so than ESPN. Yes, ESPN is sort of setting the agenda to some extent with what it chooses to cover or not cover, but also baseball doesn't quite lend itself to that conversation surrounding the sport and the drama and the personalities the way that basketball does, or to some extent football as well. So we had seen sort of a pulling back as it is, but Rob Manfred, he really didn't spare anything in that statement where he called ESPN a shrinking platform, was very frank about MLB not being pleased. And partly I think that's just to win the spin. That's just so that this doesn't go down as another example of, oh, baseball's dying. ESPN wanted to be out of the baseball business. But I think he also has some motivations when it comes to rights and what baseball wants to do with those in the future. So it's going to be interesting to see. This is not necessarily the end of an era. Of course, ESPN and MLB could work out a different agreement at some point over the next year, but Rob Manfred did not strike a very diplomatic tone in his comments or in the leaked memo to owners, which makes me think that he's ready to walk away and that potentially he has some other palatable options lined up.
Or it could be the case where, you go through a breakup and you tell your friend all, you're broken up with, but then you finally confess to your friends all the things you hated about your ex and how bad they were. And then 2 weeks later, you're back together. It's just, we'll see. There was definitely a vibe of, no, I wanted this, no, this was my idea in that letter that I kind of found a little amusing. But it's true that ESPN hasn't promoted baseball very much. And also, $550 million for about like 30 games a year is a lot, it seems. But I'm actually really interested in what this will mean for other programs at ESPN. I do like baseball, but it's not like my primary sport. And during the summer is big time for a lot of the sports that are at the forefront of my watch list, such as women's college basketball, and then the WNBA. You've got tennis, you've got the College World Series, Women's College World Series. And every year we run into, there are multiple times a year where something's been aired on ESPN all weekend. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, right, Sunday night it switches because they've got the baseball on. So I was reading that this might really open up some prime slots for some of those sports. But it's going to be interesting to see what direction ESPN decides to go. And I do think it's a little nerve-wracking for sports that are negotiating rights right now, unless your name is football, to see a network kind of back out. Like, I think for years we've just seen these TV deals going in one direction and getting kind of bigger, even if the ratings are going down, because live ratings are still, live sports are still so valued and such an outlier, even in the streaming economy. So I think there's reason kind of for all sports to be a little bit concerned about how ESPN approached this and wondering what it means across sports.
I think that if you're not the NFL and you're not one of the major college football conferences, you should be a little worried. And perhaps the NBA would be in that bucket too, though the NBA just recently did a new set of deals and stuck with ESPN, as well as making a couple of other arrangements. They're going to go to Prime Video as well. There's going to be some NBC. But I think that if you are not one of the couple of properties in sports that Disney would just never ever let go of, then you probably are watching this and wondering if your day might be coming where it's time to make an alternative move. I imagine this is a thing that comes up with the NCAA for its non-basketball tournament championships as well. I think it would be foolish not to have that in your calculus if you're a commissioner of a league or a college conference.
Yeah, because I think one interesting thing about this is that it's not as if baseball is in a weaker position than it was when it signed this deal. If anything, baseball is more popular. What with the rules changes and the pitch clock, the ratings were actually up on Sunday Night Baseball. So it's not as if baseball's been bleeding viewers lately. And so the fact that ESPN was still willing to walk away says something. It's not a ton of games, but they did have that exclusive Sunday night window. It's not like the Roku deal or the Apple deal that MLB has done. This was clearing out the schedule, and only one game is going on those Sunday nights. And very often it's Yankees-Red Sox or something similar, right? But there will continue to be baseball on ESPN, even if it's just College World Series and Little League World Series. The rights fees for those, not quite as steep. And I do think that the WNBA could be one of the big beneficiaries. But I wonder what this portends down the road for MLB. These rights were going to expire and now perhaps have. And then the Fox and TBS deals are also up. 2028 is going to be this big time where all those national broadcasts are up for negotiation again. And Rob Manfred, partly by preference, partly by necessity, has been consolidating all these local rights under the MLB umbrella. MLB is managing the production of lots of local broadcasts because, as we have discussed, of the downfall of Bally's/FanDuel. So it seems like MLB is angling perhaps for some sort of package that it could sell to perhaps one streaming giant and get everything under one umbrella. That's going to be difficult because how do you get teams like the Dodgers or the Yankees, teams that own their own RSNs or have favorable broadcast deals? Are they going to want to go in on that? There's the specter of the CBA expiring after next year. And is that going to cause a lockout, a work stoppage? How is that going to affect everything? And we've talked about MLS and how it signed sign this lucrative deal with Apple, and then maybe people don't pay as much attention to MLS because everything's locked behind the paywall. It's not getting promoted quite as much when you go exclusive. So maybe Rob Manfred's planning to pivot to Prime Video or Netflix or some other streamer here, and we'll see what happens and whether he can make up this lost revenue and continue to get that attention. I hate to put it in these terms because it's not very romantic about baseball, but when you talk about content and inventory, as broadcast executives do, baseball's in a pretty good place just because there is so much baseball and there are so many games, and that helps you fill a lot of time on the schedule. So someone will want to be in the baseball business. There's a lot of regional interest in the game. But if it's not ESPN, that's going to be a big change, culturally speaking, to how we cover baseball. And we've seen, even though Rob Manfred's right, that ESPN's a shrinking platform. They're launching their direct-to-consumer service. They have ESPN Plus, and they do still do a lot to dictate the terms of the conversation in sports. Even if it's not mostly about baseball, we saw the NHL leaving ESPN for more than a decade and how that seemed to affect the league. Now they've come back to ESPN, and maybe that has been part of the NHL's resurgence. So even if it's a smaller outlet, it's still just about the biggest, and certainly the biggest and most prominent when it comes to sports fans and how people follow sports. So there's still certainly a risk here for MLB in renegotiating.
Maybe a lesson that Rob Manfred should additionally take from the NHL's travails is that the NHL left ESPN concurrently, more or less, with its return after skipping an entire season because of a management-initiated lockout. And I think the combination of simply disappearing from the world for a year and then leaving the main conversation-driving network of sports in this country did not work out great for the NHL. Even though the NHL got the ultimate godsend of both Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin coming into the league that very next year as they were putting their games, their national games, on something called the Outdoor Life Network, and also on NBC at the time. Hockey fans will remember. Where I'm going with this is maybe don't lock out your players next year and skip a season, Rob Manfred. I don't know if that would be the wisest course of action.
Well, he's already talked about how much he's looking forward to a lockout, more or less, in so many words, and how beneficial it can be to do a lockout over the offseason. So at least you don't cancel games, which I'm with you on that much, Rob. But also, yeah, it's going to be just as contentious as the last round of bargaining was.
That is all for this episode. We also have a bonus show that is in the podcast feeds right now for our treasured subscribers at Slate Plus. It's about Stephen A. Smith, who is as much a presidential candidate at the moment as anyone else in Democratic politics. And we want to talk about why that is, where we think this might be going, and what it says about our body politique. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcast by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It makes a big difference. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelma Beatty, and thanks for listening.
That movie everyone's raving about, we have thoughts. That chart-topping hit, we have thoughts. That viral trend you can't escape, oh, we definitely have thoughts. At Slate, we don't just consume culture. We think about it, interrogate it, debate it, and when necessary, roast it. On Culture Gabfest, we break down what media is worth your time and what isn't. On Hit Parade, we think about why pop's biggest hits take off and what keeps them stuck in our head. And on my show, Decoder Ring, we unravel the cultural mysteries you didn't even know you cared about. With Slate Plus, you get even more. Ad-free listening, bonus episodes, and more exclusive content from your favorite shows. And yes, they also will contain lots of thoughts. You can join Slate Plus directly within Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Or visit slate.com/cultureplus to get access wherever you listen.